Okay, thanks, Adrian. So hopefully everybody can hear me, and thanks for joining today. So I first want to go through some of the agenda. So one thing about calculations is it does give a lot of power to a Lumira user to be able to manipulate data based on some of the calculations they require without having someone in IT create a data source. Really, I just want to give you an overview just because calculations is actually a very common question I have when, we go to things like tech ed or when I'm talking to a lot of customers. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of what kind of calculations you can do and also give you some examples. So we're going to go through some calculated dimensions on non-aggregated data. So we're going to talk about how you can group data, like what are the various ways you can do it. We're also going to talk about time-dependent functions and custom hierarchies. So in this webinar, we're actually going to create one for a fiscal year. So Lumira does support the date hierarchy, but it doesn't currently, you can't put the date in there in the hierarchy. So I'm just going to show you an alternative of how to get around that. So we're also going to merge data and do a currency conversion, which is a very common requirement. And we're also going to be doing calculated measures on aggregated data. So we're going to create measures based on aggregated data. So I'm going to show you how you can change the aggregation. I'm also going to show you how to do a conditional count and to change aggregation on the measure that you create. Then we're also going to have runtime calculations. So runtime calculations are actually performed during the runtime of a visualization or storyboard. So you can do things like differences, percentages, running totals, and custom calculations within the visualization itself. And then I'm just going to go through just a few considerations for online HANA considerations, also some best practices for performance based on some of the experience I've had with customers, and just show you some additional resources. So I'm hoping that maybe some people have seen Lumira before, but if not, I'll just kind of give a brief overview. So what you can see here is that Lumira is really made up of 3 different rooms. There's a prepare, a visualize, and a compose. Right now, I've actually acquired data already, but if I wanted to acquire data from various sources, I just want to show you what kind you can get. So you can get data from things like Excel or text or copy to you can download it from SAP HANA, or you can also do SAP HANA online. You can get it from universes. You can also get it from third-party SQL databases, or like in my case, I actually brought in data from an ERP system using a JDBC driver, using like an info set. So my data is actually sales order data coming from SAP. You can connect to Hadoop, and you can also do SQL on Hadoop. So those are just some of the sources that you can get them at. So right now, if you look at my data, I have various things like I have sales organizations. I have my document numbers for my sales. I also have currency, and my measures are net sales and quantity. So what I'm hoping to do is be able to show my manager a fiscal hierarchy based and see the trending from 2014 compared to 2015. So just to show you how you can do some categorizations, if you look on your left-hand side, you can see all of these data actions that you can do on data. So the prepare room is really how you can enhance your data. And right now, all of this data is non-aggregated, so meaning that I have, so it's actually showing each record piece by piece. And here I can actually do some cleansing if I wanted to. I'm not going to really go into the cleansing part of it, just because I just want to show you the calculations part more. So for instance, let's say I wanted to group sales org by a selection. What I can do is I can create my group number 1. And let's say I want to put in all U.S. into group number 1. And then I can create a brand new category. And I can do group number 2. And let's say I wanted Germany, so everything that's Euro. And then any other groups remaining will be others. So here I have the name of my dimension name, which is the sales org group. And now if I go to the sales org group, then I can see now which group that sales org is in reference to. So this is done per record in the dimensions. So that's one way to do it. You can also group by range. So for instance, if you have, you can do it by alphabetical, or you can also do it by selection. So like, let's say I had net sales. So net sales, I may want to group by range, you know, anything from 10,000 to 20,000, so forth and so on. So I can do it that way. But sometimes you want to actually group by multiple. You may want to group by, for instance, a city, and let's say we want to also group by the net sales that are greater than 500. So what I can do is I can actually create a calculated dimension. And I'm just going to show you the formula bar. So first you would put in your dimension name. So let's say New York State high sales. And if I start typing, you can see that it gives me alternatives of what kind of formulas I can use. So on your left-hand side, you can see all the different dimensions. And then here you can have the different functions. So there's various functions you can use. So there's, you know, character functions where like you can pad or trim text. You have date and time functions, which we're actually going to use a lot in this session when we create our fiscal hierarchy. You have, you know, miscellaneous, where you may want to do analysis whether something is contained or is not null. You have numeric, which is the general numeric functions. And then, of course, you have the operator. So the most common ones I would say is probably the if then else. So I'm going to create a condition. So if the actual city, well actually, sorry, I want to actually use state. So if I want to use region is equal to New York, and my net sales is greater than 500, then I'm going to put it in category A. Otherwise, I'm going to put it in category B. So one thing about this is it's very important that you use lowercase in the case of if, then else. If I used a capital if, I would actually get a syntax error. So if I click on here, I can now see that my states, I have various ones under the A and B. So let's say I wanted to create a visualization. I can drag and drop my net sales. So let's say I wanted to actually do it by a tag cloud. So I can actually use this New York State sales where I only want to filter by A. And I'm just going to do it for this particular visualization. And then let's say I want to bring in the sold to name. So here I can see all the customers that have sales orders that are greater than 500 and are in the New York State. So that's an example of how you can categorize data. Now, I can create a hierarchy based on my sales order date. And the way you can do that is you can just create a date-time hierarchy. And here you'll see that there's a breakdown of year, quarter, month, and day. Now, the problem is my company actually does their fiscal planning from April to March. So this hierarchy won't do what I need it to do. Okay, so now I'm going to create a new calculated dimension, and I'm going to call it fiscal year. And just to speed up the webinar, I'm just going to go in here and take some of my formulas, cut and paste. So what you'll notice is that I'm using the date function, which is month, and I'm basing it on the sales order date. And if it's less than 4, then I'll actually subtract a year. Otherwise, I'll just keep the current year. So that way I know my fiscal year is from April to March. So I'm going to do the same thing for, I'm going to create a calculated, so I'm going to call it fiscal quarter. So I've manipulated, so again I'm using the time expressions where month for sales is less than 3. So if it's in between 3 and 6, then it's 1. If it's between 7 and 9, then it's 2. So these are my quarters. So I'm going to do the same thing, and this time I'm going to do it for fiscal month. So my fiscal month in April is number 1. And then for my final value, I'm going to create the actual names of the month, just because I want them to show up in my hierarchy. So now that I have all my dimensions, what you'll notice is that for each one of those dimensions, there's a record created, record by record level. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually create my hierarchy, my custom hierarchy. So I'm going to create for my year, I'm going to create a custom hierarchy, and I'm going to look up fiscal. And then I'm just going to add my hierarchy based on how I want it to show up. So there's my fiscal hierarchy. And so now I'm able to use this in a visualization. So now if I go to the visualize room and I create a brand new object, I actually want to filter by my fiscal year. So I only want to use 2014 and 2015. And here I'm going to bring in my month. Okay, so when I create my visualization, so maybe let me just start that again. So what I'm able to do is now I can see this hierarchy that I created for fiscal hierarchy. And just to let you know, I'll probably create a blog just to show you what the formulas are. So just stay tuned for a blog on how to create a fiscal hierarchy. But what I want to do is I actually want to show on my y-axis, let's say I'm going to be using a column chart. I want to show months, and I also want to show my net sales. So I can see now that my hierarchy is starting from April, and it goes all the way to March. So that's 2014, and from April to March is 2015. And these are the various values for my fiscal year. And again, the fiscal year I've used also in a filter. So one thing that I do know is in my data, I also have, my currency isn't all US dollars. So right now I'm using currency that is both the US dollars as well as the European. So when I'm actually creating my visualizations, there's really a discrepancy if I just want to see a total sales. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go back to the prepare room. So I'm going to remove the hierarchy here. And I actually want to do a calculation conversion. And I'm going to do this on a per record basis. So what I've done is I've already prepared an Excel spreadsheet. And actually I went to the Bank of Canada website, and there's a site where you can get daily exchange rates. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now bring in a new data source. So my data source is going to take European to USD conversions on a daily basis. So what you notice is here's the date of conversion, and this is the US dollars that it would be converted from euro to US dollars. So here it's comma delimited and so forth and so on. So I really want to concentrate on the calculations. So if I can create this. So what you'll notice is I now have two data sets. One, that's my sales data, which is my main data, and also my European euro to USD conversion file. So let's go back to the sales activity. So if I look at my sales activity, I now want to do a merge. So I want to be able to do a lookup on that conversion table to bring in the conversion rate so that I can then do a calculation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and I'm going to click on merge. And I want to base it off of my sales document. And my date. So this is how I'm going to merge. So this is actually, so if you notice there's only 41% match, that's because I have more data on my sales than I actually do have in the conversion. So I'm really only bringing in conversions from 2014, 14 and 15. So now I'm going to do a merge of data. So when you actually merge data, so you're now going to see additional records. So I now have this USD sum. And what I can now do is I can create a conversion, a calculated dimension. So now I want to calculate how much it is. I want to be able to all my values in USD. So because some of these values are already in USD, I only want to do it for the European. So again, I'm going to use this if else then else condition. And first I'm going to determine what currency it is. So if the currency is equal to the euro, then my calculation will be my net sales multiplied by the USD rate. Otherwise, I'm just doing net sales. And I'm going to click OK. So now if I go back to my visualization, I'm going to create another visualization, but this time I'm going to base it off the new the new USD figure. So again, I'm going to bring in my fiscal hierarchy. And then one thing I'll notice is that my measures, it doesn't show up in my measures. So what I need to do is, because I did it as a calculated dimension, I'm now going to convert it to measure so that I can use it in my visualizations. And the way you do that is you click on the cog here and you create a measure. So what you'll also notice is that ultimately these are aggregated measures. So you can change the aggregation either to sum, average, count, max, or min. So here we're going to keep it as sum because we want to take the sum aggregation. So again, I'm going to create that column chart. And I'm going to bring in my US dollars. And so now this is really the true sales because I've now done my conversion. And one thing that I can do here, I also have the option, if I wanted to do a conversion not on a per record level, I could also do a conversion based on aggregated data. So let's say I just want to find out kind of an average rate. I can actually just put this as an average and later on use this in a calculation if I wanted to. So just to show you what the different options are. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to show a conditional count. So if I go back to the prepare room, so here I can actually do, if I wanted to do a document number, I want to count the number of documents I have. So what I can do is I can just create a measure. And here it'll automatically be a count all. So you can do either count distinct or you can do a count all. But I actually want to do a conditional measure. What I can do is, again, I can create my calculated dimension. And I want to do the 9,000 series only. And let me just to speed this up, I already created the formula here. So let's say a document has significance if it's 9,000, and I want to do a count on how many of those documents occur in my data set. So again, this document number came from here, and I just pretty much dragged and dropped. So if it is within this range, I'm going to add 1. Otherwise, it's just going to be a 0. So again, I'm going to create, based on this, I create a measure. And now I can see my 9,000 only. But again, I want to change this aggregation into a count. So again, if I go into my visualize, if I wanted to create, I find out the number of 9,000 series documents, all I have to do is drag and drop. And that's the number of documents in my data set. So those are the different types of things you can do with aggregation. So now what I want to do is, so here I had the calculated dimension. I have my calculated measure. So what I can now do is, if I wanted to do a calculation based on aggregated data, I can go back to my Prepare tab. And then what I can do is create a calculated measure. So a calculated measure, what you'll notice is you're only going to see the measures that, the actual measures and not the dimensions. So for a calculated measure, the calculation is done on the aggregated data. So let's say I wanted to do a unit price calculation. I could have actually done this at a record level, but for me, I'm going to do it just as an average. So what I would do is take my net sales of US dollars and just divide it by my quantity. So there's my unit price. So again, I could use this unit price in any one of my visualizations. Okay, so the next thing I want to show is visualize, actually how to do calculations on visualizations. So one thing that is very common, especially in financials, is you may want to do a month-by-month comparison. So what I can do is, if you look at the visualization, you can see all of these different calculations you can do. You can do counters, running calculations, moving averages, percentage of difference from, and custom calculations. So whatever values are used in this particular visualization, you can actually do a custom calculation based on that information. So what I want to do first is I want to show you how different. So right now I have 2 fiscal periods. I have 2014 and 2015. And what I want to do is a year-by-year difference. So based on my net sales USD, I'm going to see my base value of previous, and I'm going to change the base dimension to fiscal year. So I want to do comparison. The other thing I want to do is show as a percentage. But before that, I just need to change, I want to create a second axis to be able to show this information. So again, I'll just go here, and I have my net sales previous, and I'm going to base it off of my fiscal year. And here what you'll see is you can see the percentage from the various periods. So the other thing I can do is I can create a similar field. And the next thing I want to do is I want to create a difference, but I want to do it on a monthly basis. So I'm going to get rid of this one. And I'm going to do difference from. And so I'm going to use net sales of the previous, and I'm going to do it based on fiscal months. Sorry, I actually wanted to do by row table. So here I can see, if I just remove this and I drag and drop this, I can now see the differences on a month-to-month basis. So those are some of the examples you can do with differences for fiscal year and month-to-month. The other thing I can do is I can do percentages. So let's say I wanted to create a crosstab. And I'm going to put in my net sales. And I actually want my measures to go across. And in my columns, I'm going to use my fiscal hierarchy again. So here I have my fiscal hierarchy. And if I wanted to and change some of the formatting, so let's say I wanted to only show number of decimal places. What I can also do is I can create a percentage of. So let's say I wanted to do a percentage, rather than the grand total, I want to do it on the fiscal year. So here I can see that I have my values, the percentage of net. So actually, I think I just noticed that I probably have something wrong in my formula. So in my formula, it actually should be starting in April, May, June. So I just have to do a slight difference to that calculation. But we'll just continue from now. But if you'll notice, it'll show you what the actual percentages are for that fiscal year are. Oh, actually, it's because I have 2013. Sorry about that. So again, my filter, I really want to filter by my fiscal year. So I only want 14 and 15. Okay, that's better. So my fiscal year, again, is starting in April, but what you can see is 8.69% of my sales for 2014 were in April. And then if I look in April of the next month, you can see it's 7.56. So again, if I wanted to, I can continue with these calculations where let's say I wanted to do a difference between the two based on fiscal year. I can also show differences. So here I can see that in some, in the early months, I actually have less than I did on the previous year. So another thing I can do is, let's say I wanted to do a ranking. Let me bring in my customer. I'm just going to do a quick table. So again, it's a crosstab. And I'm going to base it on sold to name. And I want to do my net USD sales. Okay, so right now these are all the different sold to. So what I may want to do is I want to do a ranking. So I really just want the top 10. So I could do it sold to name, so I'm just going to do it for all. So these are my top 10 customers. So again, I can data. Let's say I wanted to do a custom calculation. So the first thing I'm going to do is also bring in my quantity. So I can do various formatting, like I can set the sizing of the crosstab and also the fonts and things like that. So for the ranking, what I'm going to do is I have the ranking, and the next thing I want to do is to do. So again, I'm going to do the unit price, but I'm going to base it off of the runtime data. So here what you'll notice is I only really see the dimensions that are within my visualization. And what I'm going to be using is my net sales divided by my quantity. So I could use the unit price that's aggregated, but I could also use the unit price by creating the calculation within the visualization itself. So those are the various ways you can create multiple calculations. So again, just to recap, you could do it on a per record basis. You can also do it on measures, and then you could also do it at runtime. The nice thing about doing it at runtime is once I publish this to, for instance, something like a BI platform, I can actually give the ability to an end user to create their own calculations within that visualization. So in the BI platform, there's no prepare room. So they wouldn't be able to create calculated dimensions, but they could, within the individual visualizations, be able to add some of these custom calculations based on what their requirements are. So just to go back to the presentation, I just want to move on to the next part. So if you are using HANA Online as a data source, since the data is not acquired into Lumira but always remains in HANA, the calculated dimensions aren't available. So you'll actually see them grayed out. So the reason for this is because the data hasn't been acquired into Lumira. It's still sitting in HANA. So what you could do is if you require things on a per row basis, you can do the calculations, could be done directly in HANA View as an alternative. However, you still have the ability to create the calculated measures, which is the aggregated measures, and using the runtime formulas are available. You just can't do it on a per row basis. And then some of the performance considerations. So working with some customers, if you're using online HANA, HANA becomes the calculation engine in the case of HANA Online Stories. Whereas in Lumira, the local velocity engine is used to acquire, like in acquisition mode. So what I mean by acquisition mode is if I'm getting data from something like Excel or from, even from a universe, I'm actually acquiring the data. So the data is physically moving into Lumira. And that's why I'm able to manipulate on a per record basis. Now, because I'm using the desktop, performance will depend on the resources I have available on my individual machine, or once I publish based on the resources of Lumira Server for BIP. So the more complex the calculations, it could influence performance depending on how complex these calculations are. So in the case of calculated dimensions, when you actually refresh the data, the higher the volume or complexity of calculations, the bigger the impact performance during the refresh, as there's going to be changes to the data source value. So let's say, for instance, in this example, I was using the exchange rates. The exchange rates, let's say the exchange rates probably wouldn't change, but in a table, if those rates changed, then the data set would be recalculated based on the new data sets once you do a refresh. and new records will need to be updated in Lumira. So one thing that I have seen with some customers is they've done a lot of layers of calculations. So for instance, they may use something like an average price, and then they'll use that average price in another calculation, and then they'll use that second calculation in another calculation. So the more layers there are for those calculations, the more the performance suffers. So the better thing to do is actually do a calculation all in one formula as opposed to putting them against multiple, like separate dimensions. So the more layers you have, then the performance will definitely suffer as well. So just for some additional resources, so for a complete list of available functions and their documentation, you can refer to the help.sap.com and I have the site here. And you can also go to the SAP Lumira official product tutorials. So, I mean, I really only touched on a few of the available functions, but there's a whole list that you can go to. The other thing you can do is, if you noticed, if you click on, I'll show you maybe after this slide. So the SAP Lumira calculation best practices is also a really good place to look at some examples of calculations. The only thing about the last document is it was created last year, so the runtime where you can do difference calculations automatically wasn't available. So there are some newer things that are available that aren't showing up in that document.
I don't know if you have any information about the ability for Lumira to support user-entered parameters. So this would support something like a what-if analysis scenario. It's not really something that you covered, but is there any info that you can provide? If not, I can take this offline.
Yeah, I mean, I could just talk about user-entered parameters. Right now, Lumira doesn't support user-entered parameters. I mean, what I would do is actually, if it's something that you would really like to see, we do have an idea place that's on the portal. So if you have an idea and you don't see it in the Lumira product currently, then you can just put it there. Sorry. And our product management regularly looks at those requirements. And when there's a new version, they look at updating that. But right now, I mean, I have heard of that requirement for a lot of customers, but Lumira currently does not support user-entered parameters.
Is it possible to hide, if you just want to show years and weeks, not quarters, for example, can you show a visualization without intervening time levels?
Yeah, what you could do is if you wanted to create, I mean, right now I did a manual calculation, but if I wanted to, I could actually remove this fiscal quarter so that it's no longer in the hierarchy, or I can even create like another custom hierarchy. Like I can keep this the one as an option, and then I can just create another custom hierarchy where I'm just using year and month. You don't have to have all levels. It's up to you which levels you want to use. So the same thing with the automated ones. Like here, if I wanted to get rid of quarter, I could actually remove the quarter from this hierarchy. Okay, while I'm here, I mean, this is a HANA data source, so it's an online HANA data source. So what you'll notice is that you do not have the new calculated dimension. It's grayed out. The only thing you can do is you can create calculations on a calculated measure. So for instance, if I mean, again, we'll just use this unit price, but I mean, I could create a calculation based on the aggregated data. And the other thing that's available is once I have a visualization, then I can do, So again, I do have this option where I can create custom calculations, but really this is done at runtime. So again, in the case of HANA, I think it's actually using the HANA calculation engine to do these calculations, but you couldn't do it on a row-by-row basis because this data is not actually acquired into Lumira. It still resides in HANA.
Custom hierarchy based on another hierarchy, like stock or inventory.
I mean, ultimately, the custom hierarchy, I mean, depending on what you're doing, you could really create a hierarchy for anything. So for instance, I could do it on product. It doesn't have to be a hierarchy on time dimensions. It can be geographic hierarchy. The only thing I would say is custom hierarchy can be used for, like, you can use it for drill down. So that's another big benefit of using a hierarchy. If you create a custom hierarchy, you should be able to do it on any type of field. The only thing I would say that wouldn't work is if you try to create a custom geographic hierarchy, just because there's mapping associated to it. So most probably a custom hierarchy based on geo features and you're expecting a map to work will probably not work. So there are some limitations around the custom hierarchy.
Is Lumira content to be available on SAP Mobile? I don't know if you have some information on that.
I mean, pretty much you can use, because it's using the business objects, once you publish it to business objects, I mean, it is available through the business objects mobile app. The question is, it depends on what functionality you're looking for. You would be able to get mobile visualizations using the business objects app.